I'm Scott M. Graves, liberal-minded economic development professional and founder of M the Media Project.
And I am not Scott J. Graves. Instead, I am Cameron McLeod, producer of Scots on the Rocks Politica. And Are We Here Yet?
And this is Scott on the Rocks Politica. Cam, how are you?
I'm fantastic. How are you?
I'm good. Now, most of our regular viewers or listeners to this podcast or video channel don't know Cam to be a very vocal person. But those of you who might listen to SMG's Are We Here Yet podcast know that he's quite vocal, and he is also our loyal and intrepid producer of all podcasts for M the Media Project. And tonight, last minute, we don't know what happened, but this is, and it's kind of too bad. This is the last episode in this half of season 1 of Scots on the Rocks Politica until after the holidays. And Scott J. Graves has gone missing. We just don't know where he is.
Yeah, it's very unlike him to just disappear and not say anything.
But he's out there something. We're missing it. Well, tonight is only Scott on the Rocks Politica, not Scots on the Rocks, but right. You make an able substitute. I know this.
I'm excited. I think it'll be a fun time. It'll be a different vibe, as the kids say.
So today, we'll of course round out everything towards the end with the Totally Towny feature, our new weekly feature. But before we do that, the main crux of our episode today has to do with some pretty exciting news that came right at the start of the week. Last week, towards the end of last week, the state of Texas filed a lawsuit alleging that it was wronged in the federal election because the states of Michigan, Wisconsin, Georgia, and Pennsylvania, I think those are the 4, right?
Yep. Yeah, those are the 4.
Alleging that the results of the election, which Texas alleged is fraudulent, constitute a violation of Texas's sovereign rights as a state to duly elect a certain president. This is unprecedented. Never before in our country have we ever had a lawsuit like this. And it's quite an interesting case. Now, by the time we're talking here on the 17th of December, a decision was already handed down. But tonight, what we want to focus on is just the fact that this could happen in the first place. And also, as all things Scots and Rocks Politica, we look for those learning opportunities, those moments that we can bring to our listeners certain bits and pieces of information about like where certain legal precedent came from, or what our amendments are about in our Constitution, what your municipal charter is about, that kind of a thing. So here we are to talk tonight about the 14th Amendment, and then also the how it relates to this idea of states' rights and the sovereignty of elections.
I think it'll be a good time. We've already established that I am not Scott J. Graves, so I don't have his lawyer mind, but it was fun. I was able to kind of play that role a little bit today. I went over, looked over the filing Texas put in, alongside with involved with Texas were Missouri, Alabama, Arkansas, Florida, Indiana, Kansas, Louisiana, Mississippi, Montana, Nebraska, North Dakota, Oklahoma, South Carolina, South Dakota, Tennessee, Utah, and West Virginia, which I didn't realize so many
all signed on.
Yeah.
As did 106 members, both newly elected and incumbents in the House of Representatives, and 20 senators in the U.S. Senate. So that actually is a perfect segue, young Cam, to one of the key parts of why we're talking about this tonight, which of course is what's yet to be determined is we had a member of the House, what was his name? Rascal? Is that how you say his last name?
That's sure. Yes.
We should know that for our
We should know that. Yeah.
Shame on us for not getting that right. Well, we may have gotten it right, but at any rate, there's some talk in Washington that we'd actually utilize Articles 2 and 3 or 2 and 3 of the 14th Amendment, citing that all of these members of the House and Senate have created a situation where they may have been treasonous to the United States. as they supported this lawsuit by Texas and various other states that signed on to it. Now, before we go too far down there, why don't we introduce to our listeners some of the facts that are material to understanding and creating your own opinions as to how this should go. So for one, you took a look, you being our intrepid and loyal producer, you did quite a bit of research this week.
I tried my best, that's for sure. I looked in a little bit, I looked into the Fourth Amendment, read through that, figured out, just got all the sections layered out, and
so we tried to interpret in layman's terms what this whole thing means. And the neat part is we can do a follow-up episode where Scott can chastise us for all our non-lawyerly
right.
But if we put into layman's terms the basic language of this, and we'll test you, we'll see how accurate you think I am, or if I'm accurate at all. So Texas, first of all, we should lay down the groundwork for people in the United States. A lot of Cliff Clavins, and every group of friends has a Cliff Clavin, right? Hey, I still don't know a fact there, Normie, that person's always likes to say that in the United States, we have 50 state elections that determine our federal election for president and vice president. And what they mean by that is that each of the states in our republic get to have a vote, an election for the federal positions like president, that and they get to perform those elections as they see fit. Mm-hmm. And then those elections determine the electors who then vote for the president. So we do not have one federal election, but we have 50 state elections that determine the federal outcome, right? That's technically true. That's materially and technically true. So yes. With that in mind, Texas is basically claiming that that because those other said states like Wisconsin and Michigan and Pennsylvania and Georgia, because those states sometime in the recent past amended their laws, namely that they, along with a whole bunch of other states, of course, they in some way, shape, or form liberalized mail-in voting. Mm-hmm. Now, in most cases, by the way, this wasn't because of the pandemic. It's because gradually over time, we've been making it easier for citizens, for our citizens to vote. And a lot of people for a very long time have had a problem with that, particularly those who feel that by doing so, they'd have less votes for themselves. So let's just get real about it, right? But at any rate, what's happened is Texas has said, because they changed these rules, the outcome of the election in those states is unfair to states like Texas, who are not happy with the outcome of the election.
Right.
This flies in the face of tradition, which in the United States, whether we like it or not, each state gets to run its own election. And the sovereignty of those elections is in process sacred. Other states do not attack those processes, and the federal government cannot attack those processes. In fact, we talked earlier in a couple episodes ago about separation of powers. This is one of those separation of powers moments too.
For sure.
Where the federal government and the states are separate entities. Right. And I will say historically and this is just quick and oversimplified, but over the years, influential individuals, including elected officials, will change their ideas about the importance of states' rights versus a centralized federal system, dependent upon whether or not they like the president or the party that's in power, or any number of power parameters, we'll call them.
Right. That's fair. I think that's a fair thing to say. Yeah, that was the biggest argument for Texas in their case, in their filing. As I was looking over it's that idea of, to them, they felt that these non-legislators is the term they use. I couldn't think of it for a second there. Affected the U.S. Constitution's legislature, therefore of, quote, meaning exactly what you were saying before. We elect those legislators, therefore set up the process in where we go to vote for these federal elections, when to vote for these federal elections, et cetera, et cetera. And that was their biggest argument, is that these in the case, I think it was, which I found kind of ridiculous, but the argument they used for Pennsylvania was their Supreme Court was a non-legislature that
Legislative
allegedly,
body.
right, non-legislative body that in turn affected or messed with the legislature,
They
messed
met
with
so
the
that so it's nullified their revised election cycle. The revised election process was nullified on the grounds that a non-legislative body made up the
the
rule.
correct the guidelines in this case, right? Because unfortunately of the COVID-19 pandemic. So, but it's one of those things. To me, as I was reading it and going through it, if the Supreme Court says, isn't that kind of the point of the Supreme Court, to help lay out what's acceptable in the name of the law, what's the right, proper use of said law? So I found it as
well, and
kind
there
of
you go. And there you go. Well, and so the answer to that would be, if somebody sues in order to enact the process that brings a case to the court, well, why not, right? That's what the court's there to do. The court is there to decide on things when we get to a point where two or more parties can't decide on their own through mediation or through debate, right?
Right.
Yeah, which maybe is the way it sounds like you and I sort of see eye to eye on that particular point.
Right.
But
it didn't make
other people
sense.
don't think that makes sense.
Right.
I think a lot of it too also has to do with the fact that people feel like the change in the rules, particularly making mail-in voting a lot easier, somehow that in and of itself has created a fraudulent election. Now, when we say that, well, no, that's not the case, the elections were not fraudulent and they've been certified. What we mean by that is that each individual state gets to certify the results of the election within that state, and then they announce to the world, in our state, in Wisconsin, we had a good count, and the election is not fraudulent. It's been considered to be a good one. We've weeded out all the problems. We know we've counted all the votes, and we're certifying, right? The state's attorney general, I think, is in all states the person who certifies the election. Mm-hmm. It's done and closes the election. No more questions asked. And then that information affects the electorates that then go to vote for president of the United States on behalf of that state at a later date, right? Which has already started to happen. So now we've sort of covered Texas's argument. What's interesting about that, whether we like it or not, for 240 years, one of the main narratives of the United States has been this tug and pull between what's more important, states' rights or a strong centralized federal government. And there are examples where a strong central federalized government were essential for basically a result that was more democratic. And there's times where it's been opposite. Now, one of the times where states' rights did not work well is with slavery, right? As an example. So if we had completely abided and continued to this day from the 19th century to now to abide by states' rights and only states' rights as the rule, then in essence, we probably wouldn't have fought the Civil War, and African Americans would still be enslaved as a people because of an economic system that was being supported by our elite, both North and South, because the economic system was deemed more important and too big to fail, as opposed to people having their rights. I mean, this is a time period in which we had made a determination that each slave counted as 3/5 of a person, so that Southern states, as they became states at the very founding of the Republic under our Constitution, so that because the Southern elite understood that the white population of the entire South and state to state was so small compared to the African American population that if they didn't create that provision, they would be so underrepresented in the federal House and Senate that it would be possible that the Northern power could end slavery right then and there.
Right.
It was a way to preserve peculiar institution, as they called it, right?
Right.
So
Right.
and not that slavery is the only major issue of ours or any time in American history that was greatly affected by this tug and pull between states' rights and federalism. But I just want us to set more than a good stage so people understand where all these arguments, come from.
Right. And you can't get into the topic of the 14th Amendment if you don't talk about slavery, because that's where the 14th Amendment comes from. It makes it so that the counting an African American as 3/5 of a person is gone. They are a person of the United States, born in this country. Therefore, you are given the rights and the protections of a citizen. But before this 14th Amendment, which didn't come until Reconstruction, that wasn't true, right? So you can't build this foundation of what we're talking about now today without knowing what the background is. And
so give us the play-by-play as you've now learned it. We'll see how you learned the 14th Amendment.
14th Amendment? I can give you
1868. Take us to 1868.
Well, if you want, I can give you a quick recap of each section, because I got it written down here because I can't remember.
I've even got that 1950s movie track-esque,
We're gonna learn a thing today.
Yes.
But yeah,
Your Constitution and You. A film strip by Scholastic Incorporated.
By Scots on the Rocks. So quick rundown of the 14th Amendment for those that do not know. So it is broken up into the 5 sections. Section 1, in short, meaning it declares that all persons born or naturalized, as I was saying, in the United States are, without a doubt, an American citizen.
This is interesting. So our idea of just that if you're born here, you are a U.S. citizen. Most people, if you ask them, think that goes back to either the founding of the country or the founding of the republic now under the Constitution. It's either that or it goes back earlier, like the Articles of Confederation or whatever. But it does not, does it?
It does not.
Only happened after we fought a 5-year bloody war where almost 350,000, I think, soldiers killed or whatever, and then well over 1 million or millions of people with civilians and everybody thrown in there, and entirely economic devastation over little more than 1/3 of the country's geography.
Right.
And finally, we get to a point where, at least citizenship-wise,
right,
all men
are considered
equal. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. It does say born and naturalized, so. Just to clarify, just to make sure you know all the details are there in the amendment. But yeah, so that is section 1. It just says that congratulations, you're born here, you're an American, and you're of that state that you're born in. So you're born in Massachusetts, you're from Massachusetts until you move. So that's that part of it. That's section 1 of the 14th Amendment. Section 2 describes how the state population would be counted in order to determine how many members of the House of Representatives each state would have. So this is
this nullifies the 3/5 clause.
Correct. So yeah. So prior to this, slaves were only 3/5, unfortunately. So this will be this. The amendment says all people are counted as a whole number, which is kind of ridiculous to even think about. I think in today's concept, not even to think as one person. So really kind of tells you about the times a little bit.
You know what's astounding to me about all this, besides just the whole what people are thinking about 3 years after the war is over in 1868. But in less than a decade before this, 1857, the Supreme Court hands down. Judge Taney at the time is the Chief Justice, and they hand down the Dred Scott case. And in the Dred Scott case was about citizenship for African Americans, particularly freedmen. And they decide in this case that people born with black skin, people born of that color, cannot be citizens of the United States.
Wow, really?
Yeah. And so, yeah, it's a little more complicated than that, but no, it's not complicated. I'm sorry. There's more detail to it, but essentially the Supreme Court, 3 years before the war starts, and this is all during the lead up that escalates into the Civil War, they decide that once and for all, that African Americans now and never will be citizens of the United States. They can't be. They have a complete inability to do so. They don't have the education, the wherewithal, and they're slaves. They're part of an economic system and they're on the wrong end. They can't be citizens. So here we are, just shy of a decade later, and these people finally, we give African Americans throughout the land, and for that matter, anybody that's a naturalized citizen or born here, the right to be a citizen. So,
right.
Means.
Boom. There we go. It only took, right. It only, like you said, it only took hundreds of thousands of lives to get to this point, not even just including the Civil War prior to that too, but
and what, some 85 years after we ratified the Constitution.
right. Right. Section 3 of the 14th Amendment states that it prohibits any person who had gone to war against the Union or given aid and comfort to the nation's enemies from running for federal or state office unless Congress by a 2/3 vote says otherwise. So basically, anyone that was part of the Confederate cannot interact or be part of the re-established Union's government in any way, unless Congress votes otherwise. Yeah.
Yeah. There's an interesting story behind all that with the Johnson administration, but we're not going to get into that today because, well, this would be a 5-hour podcast.
Right. We only
interestingly enough, did you not know, Monsieur, in 1975 and 1978, okay, long after the Civil War is over and a decade after the Civil Rights Movement was in full swing here in the United States in the early to mid 1960s, Congress restored the rights of citizenship, citing Article 3 and using it to both Robert E. Lee and then Jefferson Davis, respectively, in 75 and then in 1978.
I did not know that.
Yes, 110 years after the war was over, we gave full citizenship posthumously, of course, to the general of the Army of Northern Virginia, and arguably one of the greatest generals for the Confederacy. Huge loss to the Union when he decided to fight for his beloved Virginia as opposed to being a federal officer. And then Jefferson Davis, for those that don't know, but would say, I think I've heard that name before, the former junior senator from Mississippi who became president of the Confederate States of America.
Interesting. Huh.
Yeah,
I didn't know that.
We had to give them their citizenship back because, you know, they were worried about that 110 years after.
Right. Oh my God. Right.
Jeff Davis is saying to himself, and at 130 years old or so, 140 years old, yeah. So
finally, I can run for
finally
office again.
I can go back home.
Right. Oh my gosh. Section 4 of the 14th Amendment here, in case you've somehow forgot, even though we've been talking about it this whole time, allowed the federal and state governments to refuse to pay war debts of the Confederate Army, as well as any claims made by slave owners for their losses when slaves were freed, I should say, not free. I should use proper grammar there.
So that's the one that nullifies. I think it nullifies the 13th Amendment, essentially.
Yes, I did not look into that, unfortunately. I didn't figure out which one it kind of... Actually, let me...
Please excuse us, ladies and gentlemen. It's not like we're constitutional lawyers or anything.
Right. This is why we usually have Scott here, the other Scott.
Why Scott is here. Yes.
And then, so we'll find that. But to round out the 14th Amendment here, because the last section, Section 5, is quick and easy. The Congress shall have power to enforce, by appropriate legislation, the provisions of this article. So Congress can actually enforce everything, which makes sense, I'm glad we gave them that power.
We gave them that power. That's who actually gets to enforce it.
Yes, Congress.
So that is the 14th Amendment.
That is the 14th Amendment.
Which was an essential part of Reconstruction. And it'll be interesting to see exactly how, so when you first read this, and you're not, a constitutional scholar or whatever, or an attorney, you say, how is it that what's bridging the gap between this amendment to the Constitution and essentially saying that the 126 representatives, both duly elected in the past or just elected, the congressman elect and the senators elect, the 126 that signed on with this. Now the argument is that by signing on to the Texas lawsuit, and anyone who did, it's a treasonous act because it goes to the fundamental heart of what makes us our electorate system work.
Right. It's one of those things. After looking into the file, while I think personally I don't necessarily agree, I can see where they're coming from in terms of what they're fighting for. I don't know if, like I said, I don't know if I necessarily agree with and understand, but back to the point you were making earlier of, in the Constitution, it's given this power of legislator thereof, or the state has the power to make sure that the national election, because it's only the state election that powers the national election, the states need to make sure in a way that this is all going smoothly, because if, let's say, there was fraud in some state, they're arguing that it is your right to make sure that those, because if those fraudulent votes are
nowhere and anybody can fight it.
Right, because then it sets up the basis of, if this is all fraud, then my true vote means nothing really, because there's fraud everywhere. So my voice is never truly heard. So you can understand where they're coming from in terms of making sure their citizens are being heard equally in this election.
I mean, part of this ultimately, and I think that, and this is why we have some, bodies like the Supreme Court. My issue is this: the Supreme Court decided that there's no argument here,
right?
And so essentially, the Supreme Court saying what I felt as I was reading this last week, as Texas said, here's our lawsuit, and I'm saying, but the big elephant in the room here is of course they're presupposing that the certified elections of all 50 states were bull. These were in fact completely fraudulent, and here's how they were fraudulent, even at a time where all of the lawsuits handed down via the president of the United States were all found to be unworthy of further investigation. I mean, right. He lost every case,
right,
except one, and he only won that one on procedure, not on the content or the validity of it.
Right. And even looking into it more, and just for everyone out there that's listening, I do have a list of sources of everything that I saw, which will all be part of the episode. So if you think I'm lying for whatever reason, go ahead and take a look yourself.
It'll be there at the bottom. We're going to put this stuff up, and we all know that people don't even listen to the whole podcast. And it's long, so they never look at these links. There are literally hundreds of pages that Cam came up with from various kinds of reports. It's a great elections report there from 2005 that really gives a good rundown. It was a federal study done, and Federal Elections Commission, and it was quite interesting.
I think that was the Carter Baker report. Is that what you're talking about there? Yeah. No, yeah, they referenced that in their case and their filing here. But back to my original point I was going to make there. The facts and the evidence that they showed, saying there is fraud within this voter-based mail-in voting idea here. The report that they gave, though, was from let me find it here. Can't seem to find it. If I remember correctly, though, one of the studies that they were quoting from were to prove that there wasn't that much voter fraud within the system, within this mail voting capability. That being said, that study did find, I think, was between the years of 2000 and 2012, they found 460, if I remember correctly, cases of fraud, confirmed fraud, but that's over a 12-year period. And like I said, it was from a case trying to prove the point that this is not as fraudulent as everyone claims that it is. This is more safe than people are arguing. One of the other things that they mentioned. Um,
By the way, Scott J. Graves just texted me, and hopefully he's going to crash the party in a few minutes. Not that we need him at this point, because this is turning into a pretty stellar episode, but you know. And I hear your argument here. It's interesting when you really get down to it. What's the official word, right? About on because most of what we hear is just this never-ending array of just static from media outlets, and it's actually frankly it's our responsibility as citizens to actually read source reports from commissions and agencies that are set up or designed, or their responsibility is to report to us what they think really is officially going on, you know, which officially both parties, you know, and through various administrations, time and time again have done the research and said, okay, I mean, there's always going to be some level of fraud somewhere, but it's negligible. It never has an effect in the aggregate on any state or federal election. You know what I mean? At least not in recent memory. I mean, if we go back to the Tammany Hall days of the mid-19th century, it's a little different, but not today.
Right. To play devil's advocate, unfortunately, in their argument, there were a couple cases, I think, if I remember correctly, though two of the cases where there was reported and confirmed voter fraud were in Missouri, which is one of the states that is helping support that fraud isn't done in this election, which I found a little humorous, because one of the states that had fraud in it is now fighting for no fraud. I don't know. Funny to me. I found it a little
well,
funny.
And then there's fraud and there's fraud. There's like we intimidated people when they came to the polls. Or it's not. So Texas, of all things, is the state that for this election, okay, restricted the number of county polling places down to one location for the collection of votes after they were taken in precinct to precinct per county. Now, this is a state where counties are the size of New Hampshire.
Right.
And they're isolated. You know, so it's like, but that's not considered fraud because it was legally done. It's like that argument that, you know, well, you know, the Holocaust was legal, you know what I mean? Like, it's stuff like that people go, oh, you know, Scott J. Graves is taking a rain check on us.
Damn.
Wow.
That's unfortunate.
I'm just saying it on air just to, you know, because we're going to tease him relentlessly for this. But that's okay. It's a well-deserved break. It's a well-deserved break. Sure. He just forgot.
Hey, it happens. It happens.
It does, but it does. Well, you know, when you're a great mind.
Right. When you're one of the two Scott Graves in Gardner, Massachusetts, you got to take a break, you know.
And he's had a lot. He's got a lot on his plate, being that he is a duly elected city councilor, and he takes that job very seriously, on top of having a successful legal practice. So there you go.
There you go.
So, you know, what do you think about the idea? What do you personally think, for what it's worth, about the idea of fraud? Give us some perspective on where you think it sits in the whole election process. In other words, do you feel like this is an epidemic disease, and that we really can't say for some time we've had, you know, good elections, or is this all being overblown to actually do that which it says is already happening?
Right. I don't know. That's it. So I think personally that I don't truly believe that there is like this rampant fraud like this. I don't think that's the case here. That being said, and maybe this is more from after reading the file, I understand where the viewpoint of thinking and believing there is fraud, because, and not for nothing, with COVID-19, the way it's kind of just tossed everything up in the air, nobody really knows what's happening. You can understand, and there's already a level of stress and panic that already goes along, plus with an election cycle, new election year. So with all that added up, you can see where the fear comes from. You can see why. And to be fair, this is the first time we've done massive mail-in ballots like this for everyone. I know we've done it in the past for select groups, select people within the country, but for the most case, not to this scale. So you can understand where that fear of, well, are we actually prepared for this number of votes coming in through mail like this? Or is the process, and I think that becomes the question, is the process how it should be for this level, for things like this, for circumstances such as a pandemic?
Right.
So
I think that's one of the truest and most honest answers I've heard in a long time. When it comes to, dude, is there a lot of fraud going on? Like, what's going on? Well, it's sort of like it's you can't answer it because, like a lot of things, political phenomenon in our lives right now, the fire hose of news, the sheer static of it, just bam, 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 hitting you in the head from the moment you wake up until you go to bed at night, and this has been going on for years, that in and of itself, I think, is a tactic. It's a tactic so that we sit around and we want to be engaged citizens. And when we're talking just like you and I are, and this conversation is repeating itself in households all over America, the answer is, I don't know. I don't know because I'm getting so much static. It's so many different messages, and the vitriol in them makes me mistrust all of them. And yet they're all coming from a different political perspective.
Right.
And the big question I feel like you have to ask yourself is, what aspects of the election cycle are we not talking about that actually are the meaningful ones that we need to ask questions about in order to answer our first question? You know, because instead we're busy with, they only let Democratic observers observe in there. Is that true? Is it not? They show a picture of the people walking in and out of the building. That tells you nothing. It's no real reference to, how do you tell the D from the R? It's that kind of thing that I go, and then you're hearing this 1,000 times from 1,000 different places, and then all kinds of other things to gripe about and argue about that, it just doesn't make, it's meant to not make sense.
Right.
So that you don't have any concrete answers yourself.
Right. I don't think the answer is, even if our current media climate wasn't as blurred and muddied as it is, I don't think it'll ever be easy to find the right answer, right? Because that's kind of the beauty of trying to find the fact and the truth. Obviously, you find facts, but trying to find that truth, it's more of it's not to bring it back up, but it's a process more than anything. How do you, it's like a science in that regard. Like, how do you confirm that it's a fact? I've lost my train of thought. That's what I've lost.
I'm going to take a break from all this heady stuff, okay? And I hope our listeners are enjoying this. I just want to mention, because this is our last episode of 2020, we've got a lot of interesting things that we're going to start to add to the show. Last week, we added the Totally Towny Award. Indeed, so just about every week, we're going to do the Totally Towny Award, right? We award this to a person or persons that we just want to recognize, right, from that week's news. We're going to have some special guests, and we're going to use a lot of our guest episodes as features. So one of the people I know for sure will be coming on starting next month, and hopefully she'll come back on a regular basis, is Sam Squalio. She's a TV host and highly politically engaged. She's a city councilwoman in the city of Fitchburg, because we do want to regularly detail some of the goings on politically in Fitchburg for our listeners who may come from there. And we've been diligently trying to do this in Gardner, by the way, now for months. And Cam is the guy making the phone calls and the follow-up phone calls and whatnot with both City Hall and with our local state rep. And so far, they have yet to accept our invitation. But I am hoping that over time that they'll see their friends doing it and they'll want to do it too. Basically,
they want to get in on the party.
Yeah, exactly. We're also going to have a gentleman whose name escapes me right now, but he started a grassroots effort. He's from the Northampton, Massachusetts area, the Great Pioneer Valley, and we're going to talk about creating grassroots organizations and grassroots environments for political cause, because they did just that this past election and ended up creating something quite substantial, quite unique, and quite interesting that hopefully will have a lasting effect on voting blocks within that part of the country, and maybe
Nice.
even beyond, because they've now got 400 plus members and they're hailing from all over the country.
That's
So
awesome.
anyways, we'll
Wow.
have him on. Yeah, it's pretty cool, right?
That's awesome. Yeah, that's very awesome.
And we've been also looking at trying to have some what we call like stars. We want to have stars on. So we don't know if these people will come on, but maybe if we talk about it, we'll put pressure on them.
Right.
I'm hoping that Heather Cox Richardson, we haven't invited her yet, but we want to invite Heather Cox Richardson on. That would be a wonderful thing. This is the Boston College historian who, for some time now during the pandemic, has been writing a daily primer on the prior day's news and posting it to Facebook, which I have found enlightening, and I found it really it's as only a historian can. She really sort of takes the daily events, current events, and puts it through the prism of our past, particularly because she's a scholar of the Civil War and the decades leading to the Civil War. It's really a good perspective for us to be critically thinking about, given our 21st century current events. Anyways, that's Heather Cox Richardson. I'm hoping that she'll say yes.
That'll be fun. I love this ever since. Get a little bit personal. I went on a trip last year, and Gettysburg was one of the places I went to, and just, I've always had a fascination with. This is going to sound a little weird. I've always had a fascination with the wars: World War II, World War One, Civil War, and causes, like how did they come to be, what happened during them in terms of on the home front, things like
Yeah.
that. So it'd be awesome to have her on. I'd love to hear more, especially of what led up, because it's one of those things, the history, but you don't know the details.
Facts, where the battles took place and all that stuff, but that's not really what matters for our country right now. What matters is how did we get there, right? And that's the
Right.
thing. I have for almost a decade now in my spare time, because I'm a nerd like that. I've spent a lot of time trying to research and figure out what did lead up to that most horrible of moments in our country's history. That I wouldn't say we triumphantly came out of it. I mean, we survived.
Right.
And
That's a good
luckily,
word.
enough of the right side won the war that we could muddle on and continue the great American experiment, but
Right.
now this was an idea that you and I have been floating now for weeks. And this is another one of those, Scott has to do it, but he hasn't done it yet. But what do you think? And I know you're going to laugh, right? But you and I have talked about this several times. The girls who own the landscaping company, the
Yes.
Four Seasons landscaping company in
Four
North
Seasons.
Philly,
Come on.
that Giuliani and Rudolph Giuliani and the logistics people of the Trump campaign had mistaken for the Four Seasons Hotel Philadelphia. As it turns out, these ladies, I want them to recount. I wanted to be a fly in the wall in that room. One of them picks up the phone and it's like they get this call, and at first they must be thinking, these guys are crazy, I got to tell them no. And then they're thinking, wait, this could be the greatest thing for business. And it turns out, and one of the reasons why I've had a hard time getting in contact with them, business has been through the roof.
Has it? I mean, I'm not surprised, right?
Right. So if their business is through the roof, imagine what the dildo store next door is doing. Right. So anyways, we've got some, hopefully what'll be not only entertaining and exciting things coming up, but we want to keep emphasizing the fact that what we're trying to do here is be a good neighbor and really give a lot of things that people can chew on, both that'll be enlightening and also, providing a good perspective on both national and local politics.
Right. I think, and this is something that doing this research specifically on this has opened my eyes to. Not that they weren't open to this beforehand, but I think the kind of the path towards healing the country at this point is looking at the other and trying to legitimately and logically makes sense of the other side, so then you can have that conversation. Because like I said, like this entire file and lawsuit, I don't agree with. I think it's ridiculous. But after reading it and going through it, seeing what the 14th Amendment meant, seeing what they're putting as sources for their argument, I get it. It makes sense. I can connect their dots and see what the picture they're trying to paint in that regard.
Well, and it would make a hell of a lot more sense though if fraud actually took place in those states.
Yes. Yeah, right.
It presupposes that fraud actually took place, and there's no proof of that. And in fact, those states have certified their votes, which gets to the question, can one state sue another state just because it doesn't like the certification result of that state?
Right.
I guess that's the case. If any state can simply sue another state, we're in trouble. If in fact we emphasize states' rights as a republic. Now, I'm glad you brought up exactly what you just brought up. So this idea that it's been an act of treason, and there's a real argument for this.
No, for sure.
That our elected officials signed on to this lawsuit. I'm wondering what you think in the spirit of we now need to move forward and heal the country. Do we better heal it by rooting out this infection, as some would say, or do we seat these people and we say new moment, now from henceforward we move on? And if we do that, if we do the latter, are we inviting a part 2, a part 3, a part 4 of this same tactic?
Right. I think, unfortunately, we're in such an unthinkable time of just everything. The world is just who thought we would be here, say even just 5 years ago? Who would have thought we are where we are? 6 years, whatever. So personally, I think it's kind of a mix on that, because that is, whether you like it or not, that is the beauty of this country. You can have whatever ideal that you want, but we have to have that precedent of you can have whatever ideal you want, but we have to move everyone forward. I think there has to be some level of change for sure. I think get some of these older senators out. I think it's time for new blood, for younger blood. Not just because I'm a young person saying that, but I think.
So wait. So what you're gradually getting at here is we should see what they did as a treasonous act and not sit them.
Well, yes, to a degree. I wouldn't use the word treasonous.
What degree?
Well, yeah, not sit them for sure, but I wouldn't label them as treasonous, though. I think that's a whole different.
Well, then what other argument would you make? I'm going to push back on this. What other argument would you make to not sit them in Congress?
Now that's a good question.
Because the only thing they've done wrong is the treasonous act. They signed on to a lawsuit that.
Right.
If in fact we prove out through the legal system that lawsuit was a treasonous act.
Well, that's the thing. The Supreme Court has already thrown it out at this point. So I think that's. Well, no, they said. Right.
Well, the Supreme. So to be fair, the Supreme Court said, and I'm sorry, I'm not attacking you.
No.
The Supreme Court has already said this lawsuit has no merit.
Right.
But they didn't say it's a treasonous act. They just said the lawsuit has no merit.
Right. So, I don't know. And maybe it's too big of a question for me. And maybe I still have to figure out and find my own.
It's really one of those things, isn't it? It's like, it is just that. It's like, well, what is we've never been faced with this dilemma.
Right.
So it's like, geez, what do we do? For what it's worth, what I think is, if we seat these people, we're inviting more instability, more calamity, because I really do strongly feel that there are a lot of members within the Republican Party that are not Republicans in the sense that I think of, that you think of Republicans, my friends who for decades have been Republicans. They are, in fact, the radicals that they, point to the left and say, you guys are radicals,
Right.
instilling violence and instability in general into the political arena. And to have them there is to invite more of that. To call their act treasonous and to not sit them invites immediate level of perhaps violence on a level that over and above what we've already seen in this past year.
Right. And I think that's where
It's a
my
rough
thinking's
game.
kind of
Like,
right.
even if you want to do right by the Constitution, what you are inviting in as a next step could very potentially break up the country.
Right. Right. And right. That's a lot to put on a 20 on a millennial here, Scott. No, that's a big question.
I know.
But right, that's the world we're living in
That's
right
my
now.
job.
And it's but I think the most I can say with certainty for now is I agree with you in saying that you shouldn't seat them. They shouldn't have a say in terms of our policies like that. But then how do you allow that without labeling them as treacherous for the country, right? And then it's a whole other thing. So
Right.
who knows, man? Who knows?
Right. To be determined, right?
Right.
I have thoroughly enjoyed talking about this with you, by the way, though. I mean, these are like, this is stuff you talk about with other countries or you talk about in history, but we're talking about it because it just happened. And it's
right.
It would be more fascinating if it wasn't our generation and it wasn't right now.
Right, exactly. Right. If we were right, if we're 100 years in the future.
Study. Well, is it time for the Totally Towny Awards?
I think so. I think it's a good Totally Towny moment. I think I know who I'm gonna candidate.
I want to know. I mean, you've just been a spectator up until today. You got a Totally Towny Award for us?
I think I do. Only from what I was saying earlier, I think it's not a person, it's the whole state of Missouri, because they signed on to this Texas lawsuit, even though they're one of the definitions of where fraud was happening in their state. So I think that's a pretty towny move right there.
Dude, they totally deserve it. So the Totally Towny Award goes to the state of Missouri. I just have to record this. That's awesome. Mine, since we created this award and we're the creators of the rules, we're the creators. I have two, actually, even though we're supposed to only have one each person. Mine is a lot more local too. Earlier this week, the big our last episode 8, and then later on episode 7 broke big time on a Facebook group that we don't even really patronize. Because, for a number of reasons. It's the smallest Facebook group representing Gardner citizens, so it doesn't have as much bang for the buck. Plus, it's just, it's not our scene. But I have to say, it's just become our scene. So the totally, and it's called, I have to actually look it up. They change their name all the time. And it's usually some long title. This week, my Totally Towny Award is split between a woman named Andrea Edwards. On Facebook, she goes by Drea Edwards, and she is the proprietor of Gardnerites United, aka Someone Yelled at Me at Price Chopper. Someone yelled at me at Price Chopper. And because of the criticism she gets, she actually criticized, and he's not here. We're going to make fun of Scott again, even though he's not here, the poor guy. Scott J. Graves, she made fun of City Councilman at Large, Scott J. Graves, my co-host here on Scott's on the Rocks Politica. And the funny thing is she never once, or nor did any other critiques of our podcast ever mention the podcast or anything on the podcast. They just made fun of Scott for the fact that recently he voted against a municipal provision that was all about filling potholes. Of course, they failed to mention the context under which he voted no. Because it's not that he's against filling potholes. I think it had to do with the process by which the funding comes through, and they needed to go back and they needed to fix something before they could vote yes for it.
That's fair.
But they claim that he doesn't want to fix potholes. So my other, it's like a co-thing. So one, we have Andrea Edwards, Totally Towny Award, but the other Totally Towny, the other half of it goes to the potholes.
Congratulations, potholes.
And not just all potholes, but specifically Gardner, Massachusetts potholes. So congratulations, potholes, and Andrea Edwards, who's really good at apparently filling potholes, or at least political propaganda. So we will be duly awarding the awards to the winners later on. We have to get an award first off. We don't even have.
For now, I can just write something on a sticky note and send it
I
to
think
every
I'll send
pothole.
I'll send last week's winner a certificate, and then this week's, and then I can deliver them to the pothole sitting right in front of my house.
That's right. There you go. There you go. See, it'll be hard to get one to every person in Missouri.
How are we going to send a certificate to the state of Missouri?
That'll be a pain.
Like, what do we write? State of Missouri, care of
Totally Tony.
State of Missouri, State of Missouri State House, Missouri, Jefferson City, Missouri. It's Missouri. Jefferson City, right?
I'm pretty sure that sounds right.
Yeah.
Now we're gonna be.
No, it's not Kansas City. I think Jefferson City is the. Anyways, I guess that pretty much concludes episode 9.
Right. It's been a fun one. I'm glad, as unfortunate as it was that Scott J. Graves was not here, I'm glad I was able to fill in and have this nice conversation with you, Squat.
This has been, I had no doubt from the moment that we decided to continue on anyways, creating a episode 9 of Scots on the Rocks Politica, that it wasn't going to be awesome with you in the co-pilot seat. So my co-pilot tonight, Cam McLeod, as always, you're the man.
Hey, what can I say?
Scott M. Graves here. You'll find all kinds of the links to all the research, at least the digital portions of the reports and various things we used for tonight's episode at smgravesassociates.com/podcast/Scots on the Rocks. Or you can just go to the home menu and select Scots on the Rocks Politica, and it'll take you there.
Oh, nice and easy.
We also have a YouTube channel, and we highly, highly, highly recommend that in one or both places you subscribe so you can get video and all kinds of other stuff. And Cam, exciting, right? Cam here has helped us. We're going to start a Patreon campaign here in another week or so. And then we'll have all kinds of premium products and also premium subscription levels. So people will not only be able to get just this podcast, but other podcasts and written news articles by some featured journalists, the whole 9 yards. It's going to be really exciting 2021.
It's going to be a good year. I'm excited. I think we ended on a good note.
We did. So Merry Christmas, Happy New Year to everybody. Happy holidays to those of you who do not celebrate Christmas. Peace and love to each and every one of you and your families. This has been another Scots on the Rocks Politica. Good night.
Good night. And we're good. We're good.